Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 9 of Wake Up with Giants Radio. I am Miss Mel. I said Miss Mel because that's what I tell everybody in yoga class. I'm Melissa Lady Luck, and I am joined here by Ryan the Lion and Nicole Cola the RPG. I was in yoga mode. I was in kids yoga mode there for a minute. We are so excited for this episode, and we've come on a little early before we get on to the actual radio, and I'm just bringing Coach L in there. Hello. We've come on early because we've started to show all of our friends on social media before we go live on the radio. We've started to show you all our centering practice. So we're going to jump right into that, and I'm going to fix my camera there. All right. So we're going to take 3 deep breaths, breathing in and out. In and out. In and out. I show up as a strong leader today. I show up in greatness as a giant in speaking about priorities and boundaries. I also speak up and show up in my vulnerability so that I can not only teach others to stand in their vulnerability and learn, but I can learn from the other giants on the show today. I share with strength and with courage, and I reach out in my vulnerability and in my strength to all of those listening today. Nicole, go ahead.
Today I am service to others. Today I am present. Today I am a giant. Today I am calling in my ancestors, my guides to be here with me, to give me the courage and the strength to say what's on my heart. Today I am empowering 100 million giants. Today I am impacting 100 million giants. Today I am speaking love and light.
Ryan.
I am Ryan the Lion, and I'm showing up being intentional with my words and my actions and my deeds and giving of my experiences so that others might be able to be impacted and benefited from my experiences, to use our platform to help influence 100 million lives and to show up powerfully.
Lamar.
Today I show up as a servant. I show up as a gift that was given into the world and a gift that is to be given to the world. I show up in purpose. I show up in deliberate intention. And I show up to be and stand in the place that I was designed to stand in.
Thank you. All right, we're going to get ready to go live here in just about half a minute. And when
How
we
was
do go live,
the mic on Lamar's?
yeah, I was just going to say that when we do go live, Facebook friends, we're going to have a little intro that plays there. Lamar, you're just a little low. We've got that tunnel thing happening again, which is okay, but you're just a little low, your volume.
All right. Let me check this out here.
We've got a Facebook
talk
user
loud.
that says hello.
How's that?
All right, I'm going to go live on the radio.
Yeah, I'm totally going.
So we're just playing our intro right now. Good morning to our Facebook friend who has joined us there and said hello.
Hello, Carmen.
Good morning, Carmen.
Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 9 of Wake Up with Giants Radio. Today, We are talking about something near and dear to my heart. We're going to discuss how to discover your priorities and create giant boundaries. And I'm joined here today in studio. This is Lady Luck. I'm joined here today with Nicole, Cola the RPG, Ryan the Lion, and Lamar, Coach L. I'm so excited to have all of these incredible giants in the studio with me today. And I'm going to start us off talking about priorities and boundaries. And I'm going to say first that we're going to delve into not only creating those priorities and discovering those priorities and creating those boundaries for ourselves, but helping our children do the same. I think we were talking about this before we got on air today, and I think that's really important. And I'm going to start our talk off with one strategy. Right off the hop, I'm going to talk about one strategy when we're talking about discovering your priorities. And when I try to figure out what my priorities are, I like to sit down and journal. And I find that journaling helps to focus me. And you may be the same or not the same. You can think about this and you don't have to journal it and write it out. But I like to look at different areas of my life. It could be relationships, health, finance, work, spiritual, whatever those areas of my life are. And I like to look at those areas and think, what are the things in those areas in my life that I would like to maintain how they are, that I would like to improve, or that I would like to change in some way. And when I have those answers, when I've written down those answers, it allows me to discover where my priorities currently lie. And just keeping in mind that those priorities change as you change and you evolve, but it allows me to discover where my priorities currently are. What does that bring up for you guys?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. How am I coming through on the microphone?
Yeah,
beautifully.
You're great.
Excellent. So, in thinking about this and in thinking about what boundaries and thinking about priorities, I wanted to look up what this means. And I looked up the word boundaries, and it says a line that marks the difference of an area, a dividing line. So that leads to the question for me, where do we draw the line? And I know that's a broad question, but to narrow the scope, I will begin to look in our personal lives and where do we begin to draw the line or set the boundaries in our personal lives. And I believe it starts with understanding who you are, because if you don't understand who you are as a person and as a person of purpose, will tend to move through the earth in a random fashion. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things in our lives that we find ourselves just kind of gravitating to, because those things may be in alignment with our purpose, but generally in alignment. So we may move towards something that seems like it is, or may just be almost as close to what we're supposed to do because we're drawn to that, because that's who we're designed to be as people. But ultimately what happens is that we end up skewing the lines of the boundaries, and certain roads will take us beyond the lines of those boundaries. So being able to understand, who we are, where we are in our own lives, and then what our own purpose and visions and dreams are, we'll find ourselves not being forced, so to speak, to take those limited roads, or those roads that limit us in where we're supposed to be, and not seeking out the things that we're designed to be. And also, I think that before we can even figure out what our priorities are, we have to understand what our boundaries are.
Yeah, and I love that you said that, but I think it goes both ways. I think it goes hand in hand. Sometimes we have boundaries and we let the boundaries slip because our priorities are in a different place at that time. Right. So I think they really go hand in hand. I agree with you that and I think it can go both ways. I think we can figure out our priorities in order to set boundaries, and then we can set our boundaries and figure out where our priorities are too. I think we can they intertwine very nicely, actually. And I've actually done that myself. I found that I have set boundaries, and I've been in a place of differing priorities at the time, and I've let boundaries slip. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done this before, but I have let boundaries slip by not saying anything at all. I've put myself in a place of what I call disengaging. I thought disengaging, right? I thought disengaging was a healthy way to deal with things. And so I put myself in a place of disengaging from a situation, thinking that that was a healthy way to deal with it. And in disengaging and not speaking up and saying anything at all, I let boundaries be broken because my priorities were in a different place. My priority was to disengage, right? What does that bring up for you, Ryan and Nicole?
Nicole?
For me, I think that having priorities, for me, I'm maybe opposite. I think once I have my priorities, it's easier for me to stand firm in my boundary. And so I have let boundaries slip and I haven't said anything. And I feel like it's almost like a betrayal to myself. I feel like I'm allowing myself to be walked on. It's like if I say yes to something that I really want to say no to, right? I come from a space of maybe it's a trauma response, but wanting everybody to like me and love me. And so I want to say yes. I want to be like, oh, for sure, I'll do this for you. And then I don't have the time and I'm scattering in my calendar and I have to say things that are my priorities that I have, my schedule. I have my things that are my priorities and then things that aren't. And then I say yes to something, even though I have something scheduled in my calendar that is my priority. And so I'm like, putting my priorities there. My energy is not in alignment with my priorities. When my energy is in alignment with my priorities and somebody asks me to do something, I can say no powerfully. And I don't have any guilt around it. I don't have any shame around it. And I don't feel like I've betrayed myself. I don't know if that makes sense. So instead of, and the way that you language something, I like to say like, this didn't work for me or this works for me when. So if I have somebody that stepped over a boundary and maybe I wasn't clear with my expectation, but just saying, you know what, this really doesn't work for me. And so it comes across as not something wrong with them. It comes across as just like, this is Nicole and this is what works for me and what doesn't work for me. So finding your voice and finding your no, I think is really empowering. When you disengage, I feel like you're almost betraying yourself. That's kind of the long.
I like that. So like for me too, it's easier for me and my personality to set like, okay, these are my priorities. These are the things I'm going to accomplish or do or that align for me, that feel good for me. Because otherwise I can get distracted in a million different directions. If I don't have a guide of like, this is what I'm setting out to do, then I get distracted easily in my personality. I've got a little ADHD going on, so sometimes that comes into play as well. So if I set the priorities and put down, okay, this is what is important to me, then I can start laying it out and saying, okay, this is what I want to accomplish. And then when something comes in from out in left field or that's distracting from those priorities, I can choose to say, hey, does this align or does this not align for me? And is this going to get me closer to where I need to be or not? How is it going to affect relationships? How is it going to affect myself? How is it going to affect my family? If I take on too much, which tends to be my fallacy, as I take on too much, I say, yeah, I'm a yes man, right? I'll get this. Yeah, I can help you. Yes, I can do that. Because Nicole and I are empaths. We feel everything. We're like, yeah, I want everybody to get along and kumbaya and all this great stuff. But it ends up hurting us more than anything. So I'll set like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is, following my dreams and my goals and my visions sets my priorities. And every day then I can look and say, this is what I want to accomplish. And then I make that list of, sometimes it's physical, it's a little better when it's physical for sure. Sometimes it's a mental checklist of this is what I need to accomplish that day. And then I'll start working through that. And I'll start at the higher priorities, the things that are most important, and then move through. If I don't accomplish something that day, that goes up higher on the list the following day. And for me, that helps me stay in alignment, and it goes hand in hand too with a little bit. Nick talks about this as well with integrity. And like getting into it, back into integrity. And sometimes that's integrity with others, cleaning up your word and doing what you said you would do. But also that goes back into yourself. is you
Yes.
said that these were the things that are important, and now you're breaking that boundary of yourself, and
Yes.
so what does that bring up for others? I mean, that's what I thought when Nicole talked, and it also aligned with Melissa and Lamar as well. So I'm here as a student learning as well.
Yeah.
Oh, I
I mean,
love
which is
all of
important.
you
That's
said.
powerful.
Yeah, and everything that you said, it
Amazing.
brought up lots for me too. And so, I love the idea of making a list of priorities, but at the same time, I love what Nicole was talking about accomplishment and accomplishing those things. And I think it all goes hand in hand. And so when I set my priorities, I look at the top three things, and those three things are what I'm going to achieve today. And if I happen to achieve more of it, great. And if I don't, I still have that sense of accomplishment because those were my top three priorities for the day. But I also love what Nicole was saying and how she brought that in with other people, and being the yes man or the yes woman or the yes person. And I find that I allow boundaries to be crossed or broken in answering quickly to people and not wanting to look bad and not getting back to people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll set out here are my priorities for the day, right? And I'll set out to do those things for the day, and I'll get message upon message, or somebody wants to video chat for a couple minutes and it turns into half an hour. And all of a sudden, 3 hours later, I've lost all this time. And I don't want to say lost, but 3 hours have passed and I haven't finished what I set out to do. And that's because my boundary right there was, I'm going to finish this, but I didn't want to look bad. I didn't want to say no to these people and to these messages. And so I let the boundary be crossed by answering and taking that quick call and doing all of that, and not actually being focused on my priority for the day.
Is that like some of that out of fear? For me, it is, I think, as I go, I'm like, oh, I don't want to look bad. I don't, but the weird thing is I think for the most part that if you do voice it and stand up and say, hey, you know what, in a nice way, you don't have to be like, listen, jerk, I'm trying to get this done. And you want a video chat,
Stop bugging me.
Yeah, stop bugging me. Didn't you know that these were my priorities? Like you can say it, like, hey, you know what, I value your time and I value you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important. Let's set up a time that works for both of us. I'm trying to get this thing accomplished, and telling that person where your boundaries are, because they don't know. Otherwise, they'll just, oh, he has no boundaries. So here they just come right on in.
Right. I mean, I think that's on the flip side for me, setting up my boundaries is important for me first, because I tend to, similar to everyone, I tend to want everybody in my space. I tend to want everybody to feel good. I want everybody to be happy. And there's that unity, the unity effect that I'm like, man, if we can all work together despite our differences, if we can appreciate the differences and then connect on our similarities and build something, that's where the power comes from. But in doing that, I tend to allow any and everything into my space. So for me, my boundaries have to be established, because where will I go today, and how far will I go, and how far will I allow somebody to cross a line into my space before I do that? And then being able to establish that, okay, this is where I draw the line. So for example, if like, I know for me, when it comes to my training, my exercise, I love doing that. And then I tend to allow people to come into the space because I want to help them. Got it. Yes, I'll do it. I want to be there. But that training time for me is so connected to who I am internally as well as externally. It's connected to my mind and my spirit and me moving forward. And when I don't do that, that form of movement for me, even though it's physically, represents movement in my life. And when I don't move, I tend to get stagnant and my brain just gets into these dark, still places. So knowing when to be able to allow somebody to cross into that space, going into what you mentioned, Melissa, talking about disengaging, understanding when to engage. And then there's a point where we do have to disengage, but trying to understand what that is. There's certain things that it's like, it's not worth the battle of trying to get into this conversation or try to get into this situation. And there are times where we do have to speak up for ourselves. So for me, setting up boundaries allows me to understand that space when, okay, it's time for me to speak. and it's time for me to fall back, regroup, reset, and then come back in if it's even necessary to do that, and then be able to kind of set my path and then create my priorities around the boundaries. So, and real quick, I looked up what there were 3 definitions of priorities, and the one I loved the most was the one that says the right to take precedence or precede other things, which means that it doesn't mean something is less important. It just means that something in that space has the right to take precedence because that's the highest level of priority given. So putting those together. So, just kind of circling back, everything you said is so key, that they do run hand in hand, and they do intertwine. But for me, setting up my boundaries helps me to better create my priorities.
Do you think people respect that like more? Like, do you think that they, I mean, because for me, I feel like I'm going to let this person down. They're not going to like me. But usually when I do what you just said to do, most people tend to respect that, especially if they're real good people or real good friends. Maybe the people that don't respect that and don't respect your boundaries should maybe not be as close to friends.
Right.
Yeah.
And they won't be.
Yeah.
They'll drop off. I love that you said that, Ryan. They'll drop off. And those people that don't respect your boundaries, they're like, say goodbye, wish them farewell, because you don't want them in your life if they can't respect that, right?
I wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Yeah. Wish you well. Have fun.
Bless their hearts.
Yeah. I love that. Bless your heart. I have a friend that says that all the time. She's from New Orleans, and she says, well, bless your heart.
That's a real Southern thing, right before you're going to talk bad about somebody. Or you tell them about all their weaknesses. Yeah, they don't respect their boundaries. Bless their heart.
Yeah.
Makes it all better.
Yeah. And I want to share something about disengaging too. I mean, there's a couple questions in the chat that we'll look at as well. But and I love that Lamar said deciding when you should disengage and not. Gosh, that hit home for me so hard, because I can tell you after my divorce, I disengaged a lot because I thought that was the right way to deal with it. It was volatile. It was stressful for me. And I just disengaged from it, thinking, okay, this is healthy for me. I'm going to leave the volatile over there. And then I'm going to sit in this positive energy over here, and this is healthy. But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't dealing with it. I wasn't actually dealing with it. And it took me till years later. It was 2-3 years later until a coach of mine actually said, man, you haven't dealt with that. She said something to me that triggered me, and I got angry, and I just looked at her and went, oh my, I don't know where that came from. It just came out of me. And she said, you haven't dealt with that. You disengaged from that, and you need to deal with this now. And I realized at that point that I disengaged when I should have dealt with it and let it flow through me, and let the anxiety come through me and find a way to work it through and to move through that uneasy time in order to clear it.
That's interesting, because I find that when you have a weakness or you have an experience or like you have a difficulty in setting boundaries or priorities and things like that, it'll keep coming up until you deal with it over and over and over and over again. You might push it off to the side or disengage or try something a little different, but those will keep coming up for you over and over until you learn the skill set and the things that you need to do to solve that issue.
No, and that's where I talked about this week with custody battle with my kids. I'd gone 15 years and disengaged and tried to set boundaries that just got walked all over because the person I was dealing with did not respect my boundaries at all. And so it took me 15 years. So it's like, if you don't have boundaries, you can go and establish those boundaries. It can be 15 years later. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have this figured out today. Or if you feel like I want to set a boundary today, but this has been going on for 15 years, you have the power to set that boundary now. Whatever happened in the past, we can let that go and come from this space of where we're at now in the present.
I like that too. It's like you talked about, but the past is the past too. So, don't beat yourself up for the last 15 years of, not taking that action. Also, look, it happened. So now you can get back into integrity and clean that up and go, okay, look now, or maybe you found your voice or your courage or your authentic self and can go, you know what? I'm ready.
Right.
Here
Yeah.
we
Let
go.
me take that outside of the where we're talking, and now how do you now break down the boundaries that keep you locked into your past?
Yeah. And for me, it was a lot of work on me personally and realizing this was an abusive situation and I thought that I deserved it and I wasn't worth it. And I was just a doormat and I was getting everything that I deserved. And it took me a long time to feel like I was a good enough person. Like I was a good enough person and that I want to just cry about this because I really felt like I wasn't good enough and I wasn't worthy. And this person knew that. And he had tried to beat that into my head for so long. And the day that I stood up, even though I was terrified and coming from this space of fear, he didn't show up for court, but I sat in that courtroom shaking, thinking any moment he's going to walk in there. I was still afraid when I set that boundary, right? But it was believing that I deserved better. I was worth more. And so that took 15 years of hard work. It took 8 years to leave and then 15 years to stand up and say no more, right?
I love that you've done that too, Nicole. I'm smiling because I'm so proud of you, not because and then people on social media, like can see that,
Why are
but
you
on the
smiling
radio,
about that? I know, right?
you
I
can't
smiled
hear.
too, and then I was like, oh.
Yeah. But you know why I'm smiling is because I'm proud of her because it was, yes, there was fear that was there, but through the fear, she stepped into her courage and did it anyway and moved through and passed and look at the result. Look what happened. Like that's amazing. Like it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful.
That's
and
why I was smiling. I wasn't smiling because hey, fear came along.
It's just those things that you're gonna like. I say yes all the time because I'm in fear of people not loving me, not accepting me, right? But then when I do things from them, it's coming from a space of resentment. It's coming from a space of why am I doing this? Because I didn't say yes because it's in alignment with my priorities. I said yes out of fear. I didn't say yes out of love. When I say yes out of love, I show up differently than I do when I show up out of fear. Like a resentment comes in. But when I say yes and I want to say yes, it's like I'm fully invested. I'm there. I'm present. I show up differently.
I can attest to Nicole doing that. She shows up out of love the vast majority of times and is amazing.
Yes.
But it took me a long time, Ryan. It took me a long time growing up in fear.
You know what? And I love where that went too, because I find myself earlier, Ryan said in answering those people, he would say, I value you and I value your time. And this is what I'm trying to get done right now. I've found myself apologizing, which is not a healthy place to be either. You know, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to get this done right now and I'm focused on this. So I can't really take that call right now, but I'd love to, speak to you on a different time. But I start it with an apology, which is still not the right energy to be in when you're setting that priority and that boundary. And I want to bring us to a question in the chat as well, because I love what Lamar asked us earlier, and I think it ties in well with this question from one of our viewers. Hugh Jacobson says, "Are boundaries barricades for others? Boundaries have always kept me prisoner of my own walls." And I love that both Lamar asked the question that he asked and Hugh has asked this, because I think it's important to talk about that. I think that boundaries can become barricades if we make them barricades, if we set such boundaries because we think we're protecting ourselves from something. And that's not a healthy boundary to set. So we have to look at what healthy boundaries are to set. If we can barricade ourselves with a boundary if it's in protection and in fear. But if it's a healthy boundary and we're coming from a healthy place and we're setting that boundary because we are working on our priorities, or we're striving towards something, or because we have certain values or morals, then that's a healthy place to be. And we're going to attract healthy people into our lives that are okay with those boundaries. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be a barricade for us. Does that bring up anything for anyone else?
Well, even at my own life, I've definitely barricaded myself and created boundaries based on things that I feared, based on things that I was hurt by. So because of the experiences, like for example, there was an experience of where just me, there was a time in my life where I wasn't able to be present for my children. So in that space in my life, I created these boundaries of, because of that experience, I was not any more valuable than my lowest experience. So I put myself in the dirt, and I threw the dirt on top of myself, because I felt like that I couldn't be successful in any other area of my life because I wasn't the father that I knew I could be, and the father that I didn't experience in my own life. And that was key, and is key for me, of being the parent that I knew that didn't show up for me, and not that it was a bad experience, but I knew what I was missing. And then I felt like me not being present caused me to do the thing that I didn't really like done to me. So because of that, I lived in a space where I literally put myself in a depression. And it took my sons, and this always tears me up, but it took my son coming to me and telling me that he loves me and he still sees the greatness in me. And I'm like, when my son came to me and told me that, at I think he was either 14 or 15 at the time, that literally shifted me. But the thing is, even when you're shifted and you start to realize who you are, you find out that it doesn't just switch, because you're still going to be battled. You're still going to have battles in that space. And I can relate to Nicole, because even in coming out of that space that you were in, those battles are still sticking at you, and it's still pulling at you. And there's that thing that wants to get you to be comfortable and stay comfortable in that space you've lived in for so many years. Like, no, come back to being nothing. That's who you are. That's where you want to be. That's the person you are. And that other part of you is fighting like, man, nah, this is not who I am. And you know that. So those spaces create the boundaries that can lock us in. But once you realize is that every purpose and everything we go through is designed to make us into people we are designed to be, then you can start to embrace that, even though what looks like it was bad was designed to build something better, something stronger. And ultimately, it's something that's bigger than us. And that's where we find ourselves in the greatest area of service, when you're able to give in a space that's bigger than yourself.
There's a lot of people too that can relate to that fear, that that emotion. But I loved what Nick had talked about is empowering, is that that courage. He said, what did he say? He said, courage is the power available inside of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then transmuting that energy is that, like if you're going to like squeeze grapes, right? You get grape juice. You squeeze, if you squeeze fear, you get courage. You go, it's so interesting, right? It's not the same. You can transmute it. There's power inside of that, where you can fully change and get excited. You can get power. You can get joy, from fear. You can actually just put it through that press and get something totally different. It's really kind of an amazing concept there.
Through both fear and anxiety, I think. And I've been talking about this in the league with the league members yesterday and this morning. I was just talking to Nicole about it. I'm preparing for something big that's happening over the next week, and I was in some huge anxiety yesterday about it, like paralyzing anxiety about it yesterday, and I wanted to disengage. I spent the entire day with this internal dialogue, like, okay, nope, just go to bed and lie down and watch TV and forget about it. Just forget about it and pretend like it's not happening. And I'm like, no, it's happening. You have to do it, and you're going to do it. And if you sit here and you focus and you and you take that anxiety and you turn it into a motivation and you have courage, then it's going to go well. And you're going to be prepared. And you're going to, but I had that whole internal dialogue all day yesterday. And then I woke up with that energy flowing again this morning and had to breathe through it and know that, okay, you're on track. You did well yesterday. You accomplished yesterday. You got done what you needed to get done. this is today's goal, this is today's priority, and you're going to be able to do it. And there doesn't need to be any anxiety or any negative energy. You're good. But it was a lot of internal dialogue yesterday. I literally wanted to run to my bed and watch movies and forget about it all day. And it was that changing that anxiety and making it my motivating factor and making it the energy to drive me forward.
And look at you today, like the energy that's coming from you versus because we're on a group chat and people don't get to be on that group chat like we do, but we get to be on the group chat and talk about these things together, about what we're going through in life, and be there as a support network. And yesterday's energy, it was a lot. It was like, oh man, that's a lot to deal with and handle. And I had anxiety for you. But today, taking that and the giant that you are and understanding these concepts and principles that Lamar and Nicole and you have been talking about today, and then implementing them and knowing what to do when these things come up. And it's not always easy. You know what to do because you've done these things over and over and over again. You've been through hard things. But it's still a real life. It's still life happens, and you still have to make that choice and say, okay, I'm going to do this. This is what I do, and step into it. It doesn't change the task of going through it. You still have to go through it.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to go to an ad here. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back. All right, so we're on a 2-minute break there on the radio show, and we've got lots of comments and questions in the chat here. So when we get back from break, we should address some of these questions and comments.
Hi, Man Cherry. Hi, Nicholas. Hi, Diana.
Hi, Diana.
Hi, Lindsay. Carmen. We love you, people.
Good morning, afternoon/afternoon.
Yes, it's good morning here.
Yes, it's afternoon here.
Yes, it is. It's good morning.
And if you guys haven't subscribed yet to to YouTube, go subscribe.
Yes, please do.
You can get all these episodes from Wake Up with Giant Radio, Wake Up with Giants TV, Park Bench, all those goodies.
In the corner.
Yeah, go subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yep, and I'm going to tell everybody on social media right now, you're just getting the inside scoop that I just picked up my phone to look at the radio chat and saw a message come through that literally, like you guys all know, I've had the trifecta going on here for the last about 6 weeks. And I was just saying before we went live that by the end of this week, I should have everything cleaned up. And I just got another message through that said, yep, another thing that was going on is going to be cleaned up by the end of the week. So, yay!
Think of all that
happening.
Energy. Yeah. So much creative energy, having all this done and over with.
Watch out, world. Here comes Melissa.
Here I come. That was kind of a little scary.
Really scary.
Be warned.
It's awesome.
It's opening the doors for Storytime Yoga.
Yes.
Boom.
All right, we're back in 2 seconds. Hello and welcome back, friends, to episode 9 of Wake Up with Giants Radio. Today we are talking about how to discover your priorities and create giant boundaries. I'm joined here today with Nicole the RPG, Coach L, Lamar, and Ryan the Lion. And we are going to jump now, I think, into some of the comments and questions that we have here. I wanted to go back to one here that asked, I'm going to take a minute to go back to here. We talked about it being barricades.
Is it this one?
Find that. Oh,
there's so many comments.
Boundaries, yeah, I know there's so many. Hugh asks, when your boundaries are crossed, who has to fix it? And I'm so glad that you asked that because, my friend, this I'm going to answer, and I bet this answer isn't what you're expecting. When my boundaries are crossed, I look inside myself. I don't look to the other person because my boundaries are my way of letting people know what is acceptable for me. what is okay for me, how it's okay to treat me, how it's okay to enter my world, how it's okay for me to spend my time and where I will put my time. And if a boundary has been crossed by someone, I look inside myself and I look at myself and I say, self, what did you do, or what did you say, or what did you not do to let that person think that got Ryan self
Yes.
to let that person think that it was okay to cross that boundary, or let that person think that that boundary had been taken down. So I definitely look to myself, not to the person that's crossed it, because I've given that person some inkling that it's okay to cross it. It's like, let me give you an example. I'm going to give an example of children, because we talked about how we were going to talk about children today. So if I tell my children that they need to ask permission to have sweets and go into the cupboard, the sweets cupboard, okay? And they ask for permission all along, and there's no issues, and we're managing their consumption of sweets, and they know what their limit is and all that kind of stuff. And one day I turn my head and one of my children goes into the sweets cupboard without asking permission and hides
the sweets cupboard.
Yes, I know. I love the sweets cupboard too. One day, one of my children goes into the sweets cupboard and takes sweets without permission. And I know it's happened, but I don't say anything. Now the boundary has changed. Now that child knows that they can go in and take the sweets without asking, and nothing is going to happen. There's no consequence. I'm not going to say anything. Right? That's just a simple example, obviously. But if I don't say anything, then the boundary has been crossed, and they know that they can break that boundary. So I've allowed that boundary to be crossed by not speaking up. And we do that in tons of different ways, not just not speaking up, but we do that in tons of different ways. So I go inside myself to figure out what I have done or not done to allow that person to think that it's okay to cross that boundary. I love that question. Thank you for that question. What does that bring up for everyone else? Oh my goodness, crickets.
Well, for me, it's just sometimes you can be very clear about a boundary, but there's some people that don't think that boundaries apply to them. And so that's where I have found myself in relationships where I've been made to feel like I'm crazy for having boundaries, maybe. And so I look at myself, but in looking at myself, sometimes it has driven me further into, I don't know, into guilt and shame. So I have to look at myself first and just see, like, yes, did I set this boundary? Was I clear about my intention and state that? And then there does become a time when it's like, wow. And I think we know too, like we know when somebody is crossing a boundary after we have set that boundary with intention multiple times, to know if we need to look at the other person, if that makes sense. So I would say first I look at myself, but I think intuitively, like your intuition, you'll know if you're dealing with a person who just doesn't respect boundaries, which I've come, I think that we've had that even with our tribe. In a tribe of giants, we've had some people that we've set very clear boundaries for them. And we've looked at those boundaries and thought, like, are we, do we give this person more, how do I
or extra, more space,
do we give more room?
leeway?
Do we give this person more room because, and if we do that, it's like, so we set very clear boundaries, but there's still people that won't respect them and will try to walk all over you.
Yeah, and sometimes you really can't say goodbye to your kids per se, but sometimes you have to like cut those people out of your life that that aren't respecting your boundaries because they're not serving you, they're not helping you, they're not respecting you. With kids, you have to. I think you have to do it a little bit differently, and then go more introspectively, look at yourself, and go, okay, yeah. I wasn't being the parent that I should have been,
Right.
and watching that stuff. So how can I fix that? Because your kids probably aren't going to do that. They're probably going to get another hankering for a donut and want to get in the sweets cupboard, And so the trick is, I think, for kids is to be consistent and watch that stuff. And then there's also needs to be some kids need to learn that, hey, like real life actions have real life consequences. I mean, you don't have to beat your child. Please don't beat your child if he gets into the sweet cupboard, you know.
Yeah.
But discipline comes in there, and talking about that and telling them how it makes you feel and why it's not okay, and going through that with them, hopefully repetitively over time. It'll get ingrained in their thick little noggins, you know, because sometimes kids are a little bit crazy and stubborn. You know, it takes time for them to learn and their brains to develop and to help them understand those things. But if you just let them do that over and over again, well, you get that same result. You'll go crazy. You know?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
I
I
think
love
we
that
have
we're
to have the
moving.
ability. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think we have to have the ability to self-assess, because when we make these decisions to allow people to cross over certain lines, it's usually a reflection of something maybe we've been in, especially as it relates to children. You know, I'm pretty sure that we're in a generation where, or we've probably passed several generations where we said, well, we didn't have this, and I'm not going to let my children do this because I didn't have this. So I'm going to give them everything they want. And the question is, how's that working out for you? And chances are it's not working out as good as you thought it was by letting them have everything, because you had boundaries and you felt like boundaries was a form of punishment. So the ability to self-assess, as it relates to our children, as it relates to our jobs, because there's times on jobs we won't speak up for ourselves because we feel like we need the job, and because we need it, we can't speak up for ourselves, and we're put into a box or our own prison. And it's things that we create because we've allowed people to go into that space and master our spaces, and we've surrendered our power in our space. So being able to self-assess, like, where am I? What is it that I'm doing? What is it that this connects for me? What does this relate to for me? So letting my children do X, Y, Z, or letting somebody on my job do X, Y, Z, I do that because. And when we can get to the background of why we do what we do in terms of allowing people to cross our boundaries, it allows us to go forward and establish those boundaries in clarity and not have to feel the guilt about doing it because you didn't do it before.
I love that you went there. Absolutely love that you went there, because I was headed there in a different way too. And I think that we can all agree that lots of us included, us on the show here today, and lots of our listeners have learned to set boundaries as adults at any some stage of our adult life. And I want to talk about teaching our kids and helping our kids to set boundaries, because I remember it being really controversial when my kids were growing up. They're 9 and 12 now, but when they were young, I remember it being very controversial when you would force your children to give a high five, or force them to give a hug or a kiss, even to a family member, to say goodbye. And in our generation, it was polite that you gave that hug or that you gave that high five to say goodbye. But when you really think about it, we're forcing our children to move out of their boundaries, to move into a place that's not comfortable for them. We're telling our children that their boundaries are not okay. And so I really think that it's important, obviously, weighing that between that and politeness. I really think it's important to be mindful of that, even with my kids at 9 and 12, to be mindful of helping them set their own boundaries as well now as children, and learning how to set those boundaries and what that looks like, learning to set priorities and what that looks like. And I recall my 12-year-old, he's 12 now. I remember him being, he was 11. And I think it was just at the beginning of the pandemic. We had just started online learning, and the kids were talking a lot by Google Chat. And school wasn't really like focused as it is now. The online learning wasn't really set up as it was now because the pandemic had just hit. So the kids are chatting with each other on the chat. And I'm that mom who goes in and looks at the chat. You're allowed to have a cell phone, but just know that I'm going in and looking at your conversations. So they better be polite and all that jazz, right?
Yeah.
And, my kids I've never found anything that they should be ashamed of. And I've never found anything that I've had to discipline for, but I do go in and check. And so I was going in and checking these chats, and I found a conversation between my son's best friend and him. And the things that were said to my son, I was offended by. And I thought, okay, I've got to step back here because maybe my son's not offended by that, but I'm offended by that. And if somebody had said that to me, I would be pretty upset. And so I had to really step back and think about it for a while and almost like have that cooling off period before I approached him about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I approached him about the conversation and just said, you know that mommy checks your messages and this is what I found. And I just want to know how you feel about that. And he was totally fine with it. And when we had that conversation, I found out that he had actually stood up for himself and said, it's not okay for you to talk to me that way. Now, I didn't see that part of the conversation. So I was really proud of him for standing up for himself and saying, it's not okay for you to talk to me that way. And he wasn't upset about it in the way that I was like, just, taken aback by it, whatever it was that was said to him. I was like mama bear, right? The mama bear was coming out and I had to really hold that back. But, he wasn't as offended about it as I would have been if it had been said to me. But I was really proud of him at 11 years old. He had stood up and said, it's not okay for you to talk to me that way to his best friend. And I think it's important for us to have those conversations with our children as well and let them know that
kids
this is
watch,
how we set that.
Right, Melissa? I mean, your kids watch and they mirror you and they watch you and they see what's okay in your relationships and in your boundary setting and your priorities. And they see that stuff. And so that's why it is important as parents, as somebody that's trying to model like, hey, this is what's okay, not okay. If they get that a lot of the not okay, that pattern might continue into their lives, and they might adopt those things kind of subconsciously because that's what they're seeing. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think when we have to reestablish boundaries, I think it teaches them like this boundary was broken, and then we can show them like, going into the sweets cupboard like that day, maybe this is what was going on, but we know that this is the boundary. And so it helps them learn like, okay, if somebody oversteps a boundary, I can go in and reestablish it with the tools that mom used for this situation.
I like to delve even deeper too. Yeah, sorry, just one second. I like to delve even deeper too, and with my kids in particular, and oh my goodness, it just hit me right now. Man, I should be doing that to myself. I should be delving deeper with myself too in those instances. But with my kids in particular, if a boundary is crossed, I like to delve deeper and find out why the boundary was crossed, what was going on, what emotion were you feeling, what was happening in your life when you crossed the boundary, because maybe the boundary wasn't intentionally crossed. Maybe the boundary was crossed for a reason, especially with kids, right? But that just like put on a light bulb for me. I'm like, oh, Melissa, you should be doing that for yourself, right? You should be asking yourself the same thing when you let a boundary be crossed. Why? What's going on? Yep, I just learned right there.
Sometimes it's we talked about this in Wake Up with Giants TV. It's your operating system, maybe the way you were taught as a kid and mirrored your parents or your role models or whoever was around you, or life experiences. Right. I had a question about we've talked about this a bunch about self-care. And giving yourself permission to set the boundaries. Like sometimes that's the hardest thing in the world. And I see Nicole on social media. She's like getting excited because this is right up her lane, and she's taught me some of this stuff. Yeah. So like I had this operating system of little Ryan, right? And it was it worked for a period of time, and it was meant to keep me safe and some things like that. But and I won't go too deep into that, but over time that didn't serve me anymore. And I think that look, if you're getting walked on, if you're not getting close to your goals and your dreams and the things like that, it's okay to give yourself reset, give yourself permission, take time for yourself. Really, I think it comes down to a little bit of self-respect too. Like, you are worthy, you're worth it, you matter, you need these things. This is important for you. And take a pause and step back and do that self-reflecting, Melissa, like you talked about, and just looking at it for yourself and then changing your operating system. But giving yourself permission it's hard for me. I don't know why it's been hard, and that was my perception, and I'm learning to change that. I can change that perception that it's not hard. I just haven't done it like I should be doing it. So I'm learning tools to become better, give myself permission to take time for myself, to slow down, to set the boundaries.
Yes.
Thoughts, comments, jokes, riddles?
Yeah,
What
no,
do we
I
got?
love it. I know, I love that you said that, because when I work with families, we work on a lot of strategies to help bring routine and structure into the family as a whole. And one of the biggest things is self-care not happening and boundaries not being set by parents, because the kids are there and the kids are running around. And so in my household and with my clients as well, we talk about how can we involve everybody in that routine or that self-care, or allow them to know that that's your self-care and that's your boundary. So in my house, my kids know that every morning I get up and do my meditation, and it's usually 6 o'clock in the morning, but on the weekends it's a little later. So if I happen to sleep in a little later on a weekend, on a Saturday morning, and I'm doing my meditation at a different time, my kids know my meditation exactly. They will look out of their bedroom doors. Okay, she's in the lying down phase, so it's almost over, right? So they know, they know how long it is. They know what I do in the meditation, which probably tells me I should change it up and do something different. But they know, and they know that that's the boundary, and they don't step out. They don't come out and make noise. They don't go into the kitchen and make their breakfast and do whatever until that's over. But they also have those strategies themselves, and they have set up for their own meditations, where my daughter does hers either in her special chair that's across from me here, or in her bedroom in the morning. That's her quiet time. And my son, on his lunch period during school, will go into his bedroom and do his meditation there. And so we're setting those boundaries together as a family. We all know that when my son goes to do his meditation on lunchtime and his door's closed, we stay quiet because we know he's doing his meditation. So we're setting those boundaries for that self-care together as a family unit.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nicole.
No, go ahead.
So I don't want to divert too far, but I have a question in terms of what happened when the boundary goalpost moves. Because in certain instances, we set boundaries, and maybe we've grown to a different space and the boundaries change, or somebody else has grown to a different space and I don't want to say don't respect the boundaries as much, but in terms of our children, so children becoming from preteens to teens, the way they function or respond to the boundaries may be different. So how do you address when the goalpost moves in terms of the boundaries? Because everybody also has a different standard, and the boundaries that I set, if I set them in stone and say, okay, these are my boundaries and these are my priorities, somebody else may not adhere to those, or may perceive our boundaries or priorities as crossing their boundaries or priorities.
Oh, that made me stop and think.
Yeah, that made me.
I know we all went silent. I was like, oh,
I've got,
and
made me want to watch football. I'm just kidding.
Well, that just brought something up for me, and I don't know if it was along the same lines, but it brought up for me my kids and their boundaries, and how with kids boundaries can change so often as they grow and as situations change with them, and the goalpost can move, and sometimes we struggle with that in our own household. And I'm going to give you an example. My daughter, she's 9 now. When she was about 7, she started to have some anxiety that showed as behavioral issues. So when we talk about anxiety in kids, we talk a lot about how, like I talk with my clients about how anxiety can show as a behavioral issue. You might think that they're acting out, but it's actually anxiety. Maybe they're hitting or they're yelling, and it's actually anxiety that they're feeling. And so my daughter was exhibiting anxiety in that way. And it was coming out as anger or hitting or biting her brother. And we came up with strategies to deal with that. but in coming up with those strategies and having those conversations, we came to understand what her boundaries were. She didn't like getting made fun of. If the joke was on her, if she was being laughed at, that was a boundary for her that really upset her. And so we came to know when we might be crossing the line with her, whereas before that, we didn't know when we were crossing the line. And strangers coming in wouldn't know what that line was and wouldn't know what that boundary was. And so we made sure that we were vocal. If I saw somebody at our dinner table or in our living room, if I could hear them coming close to her boundary, I would say something in a generic way to let them know not to cross that line, right? Not to hit that line, because our line is there. But having said that, as she's grown and as she's matured over the last 2 years, as mature as she is at 9 years old, that goalpost has changed. Right. And we know what her new boundaries are and where that's moved. So that's what came up for me in that, Lamar.
Yeah, that could be maturity, or that could be like capacity. Your capacity to handle certain things could increase. And I know that's for me, that my capacity is increased versus a year ago where I was at. My capacity is much higher than it was before. And so before, I couldn't handle a bunch of other things going on my plate, right? My plate was only so big. Once I got to learn how to have a bigger plate and bring it to the buffet, I knew how to, stack that higher and deeper and manage it, without getting overwhelmed and without the anxieties coming up but you have to manage that properly, or else it'll get it out of control or out of proportion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And, I want to go to a comment here. I'm not going to put it up because it's going to cover us all. It's so big. I don't know who it is. It says Facebook user.
It looks like
a comment come in, so let me scroll to it. Our visitor says it's a terrible feeling when you know your boundaries are being broken, but
this is a Canadian comment, by the way.
It's Lori.
Yay!
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Okay, I can just see Facebook user here. But you feel like you can't speak up because the person involved, like a boss or a spouse, has you under their thumb in some way. If speaking up could cost you a job or something else important to you, it's tricky. And it's true. It's true. I agree with you there. It's tricky to find the right way to approach those things. But I think if we come from a loving space and come from our heart and talk about our feelings and how that made us feel, or what position we feel like we've been put in with those comments that may have crossed our boundary, or that situation that may have crossed a boundary, without being accusatory, I think that we can still get our message across in an appropriate way that's not, going to get you fired or end your relationship. Anyone else?
I mean, I think, and it's really, and it may come out easier than it actually is to do, because if a person has been in that position or that situation over time, there's some conditioning that's gone on there. So if you're at a job, there's conditioning that's happened, and you've been at the job, and let's say you're a single parent, or let's say you're not a single parent, and the job is so vital to your household, or you're married to someone, or you're in a relationship with someone, and you've conditioned yourself, and you've allowed yourself to be conditioned to say, this is who I am. Well, I'm not going to say nothing. I'll just leave it alone, just because I don't want to fight. So there's a conditioning that has happened in that space, and allowing yourself to first, again, identify. You have to be able to self-assess, identify that there's a conditioning that has happened, and then really look at, does helping you by being silent or being quiet hurt me? And if helping you is hurting me, then I really need to reassess, where am I in this relationship? Where am I in this job? And a job is a form of relationship. And then really begin to dig deep and decide, like, where do I go from here? Because once you identify it and you know that your boundaries have been crossed, you now become the responsible party to say, look, I have to really make a decision, because I know this is happening. And something I firmly believe and teach my daughter, especially for women, that women are carriers by example, by nature, that if a woman is pregnant, she carries a child. And if you carry the child to term, then you'll deliver the child. If you carried a child for 12, 13 months, can you imagine that this woman would probably be dead from carrying all of this stuff? So if you carry something beyond the time that you should be carrying it, ultimately you're going to find yourself in a position where it's going to start killing you one way or another, whether it's stress, whether it's this emotional, whether it's how you impact other people. So at that point that you realize that, it's time to really make a decision on what your next step should be, how valuable you are in that space. And if your value is not accepted or appreciated, then it's time to move.
Yeah. I think with
I
saying
love that.
this doesn't align for me, it's not saying you're wrong or this is wrong. It's not a judgment. It's just saying this doesn't align for me, or what does align for me is this, and saying it in a way that is not accusatory because the other person may not know. But yeah, Lamar, I've been in situations where a lot of conditioning has happened to where I've felt like I didn't have a space to say, to use my no. And people that haven't found your no, it is so empowering once you find your no. It feels amazing to say no. It's not scary anymore, right? And it's just, no, this doesn't align for me. And there's no judgment around it. Yeah, this does not align for me. Being able to say that powerfully and just,
or I don't have capacity for this, that same type of thing.
Yeah.
You could interchange any type of, word there, but this doesn't align for me. I don't have the capacity for this at the moment.
Yeah. And that
Let's
first
revisit
no
it
may
down the
be
road.
fearful. That first no may be like, oh my gosh, I said no. And it may wreak havoc on your thoughts. Like, I said no, what do I do now?
Yeah. Well, the first time
But
I
sit
found
with
my
it.
no, I expected like the world like to burn down. I
Yeah.
expected like things to like blow up, explosions, like Nicole said no. Guess what? None of that happened. It was
Yeah.
fine. And I was
Yeah.
like, I said no. And the other person was like, okay, no problem.
It's what fear does, right? It's not real. It's just
Yeah.
a trick most of the time. It's nothing.
Yeah.
It's mostly going on inside of here.
Yeah. And it'll shock some people, especially if you always said yes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, it will. I actually had that happen to me last week. I had someone who wanted to jump. They said they had 15 minutes and they wanted to jump on a quick call with me. It was in the middle of something that I really needed to finish. Like I had this certain amount of time and I needed to finish it. And in Melissa fashion, I said, I'm really sorry. I can't do that right now. I'm focused on this project. I have to get it done in this allotted time. And the answer was, no, you're fine. It's fine. And nothing happened. Like the world didn't blow up. It was okay. Nobody got angry. And I was just like, oh, okay.
Well, and I think being able to ask people too, if they have a deadline, like, do you need this right now? Or can we delay? Like when I work with clients, can you delegate it? Can you delete it? Or can you delay it? So if somebody asks you for something, okay, great. When is your deadline for this? When is it that you're going to need this? So that if I'm going to put it into my priorities, I will know if I have capacity. So asking the questions and then looking at your calendar and anything that's not in alignment with your priorities, that you go through and delete them. You go in and cancel them, because you're not going to bring the same energy to that event anyway. If you said yes and you really wanted to say no, go in and cancel. You're allowed. Nicole's giving you permission. Cola to RPG is giving you permission.
Yeah.
And then delegate. If it's a no for you, do you know someone that would have capacity or that's passionate about it, that like, especially in a job environment? Well, I don't have capacity for this, but so-and-so may have capacity and they may be passionate about this project. So those are 3 things that I use: delegate, delete, and delay. So
one other
isn't
thing
it funny how we, sorry, I was just going to say quickly, isn't it funny how we ask about deadlines and whether or not there's a deadline for something when we're at an actual job, like with a boss, but we don't ask that in our personal life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In our personal lives, we don't ask that. And I'm guilty of the same thing. At work, I wouldn't think twice about asking a boss or a manager what the deadline is for something. But in my personal life, I don't ask those questions.
I was going to say too, it's okay. I think going along the lines of what Nicole was talking about, if it feels overwhelming, if it's a lot for you, start small. It's okay. I'm going to give you permission to play small right now. It's okay in this scenario. Start with something that's small and get through that. And then build the self-confidence and the respect and start building that up, that, hey, look, I can do that. I can do that. It might be a hard thing for you, even though it was maybe a small thing. It was a hard thing to say no to something, just find something and say no, set your boundary, get a win, celebrate it, get excited, do your happy dance, put on your tunes, whatever makes you excited, and celebrate that, and then do it again. And it'll be interesting to see. I guarantee you, over time, you'll be able to expand those boundaries, be more assertive, and grow. And the power that'll come from that in your personal life is going to be phenomenal.
I absolutely love that. And on that note, I think it is time to sign off for today. So we're just going to tell our radio listeners here that our episode, or our topic for next week's episode, it'll be episode 10 next week, is why micro steps. This is why it was a perfect note, because this is what Ryan's talking about, small steps, why micro steps are important and how to pivot. That's what we're going to be talking about next week, mini steps and pivoting. So we will play our outro here and say goodbye to all of our radio friends.
Love you too.
Love you guys.
See you, everyone.
So we're on social media still. We're just going to play our outro there, and then we will sign off of the radio station. Yeah, that was a perfect place to end, Ryan. Thank you very much. I love that, taking small steps and playing small. I like to call them micro steps, and pivoting where we need to. We're going to get into that deep next week.
Awesome.
I'm excited. Yeah. And the Kickstarter, if you guys haven't checked out the Kickstarter for the Giants and the Smalls 2.0, go check it out. They have some amazing packages on there. If you want to sponsor someone, if you want to sponsor, what is the charity that you guys have? The
Pure Hope Foundation is in there. Also the Christmas Box House. And
yeah, when I saw that it was an option to get a book and send it to the Pure Hope Foundation isn't that for children that have been involved in sex trafficking?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so amazing. So
Catherine
beautiful.
Lee, thank you.
Yeah. Check that out. If you guys haven't joined a tribe of giants, come join us. We need more giants. If you haven't subscribed to YouTube yet, go subscribe. And then if you'd love to sponsor our show, we would love to have you as a sponsor. So you can get with us.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that soon. Our sponsorships are going to be opening up for the radio show. So if you'd like to be a sponsor of the station, or if the Wake Up with Giants radio show, please do get in touch with us. Anything more to say before we sign off of social media?
Phenomenal show.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of our support from our tribe of giants. Everyone that was in the comments today, you guys are so powerful, giants, the way that you show up for us and our tribe to support us. I'm so grateful for you guys. Thank you for being here today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we appreciate every one of you.
And for my fellow giants, Ryan, Lamar, thank you so much for showing up today. Melissa, as always, you are a great hostess. Absolutely.